Thank you for coming. I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Aidan, Holland, and I'm Senior Teacher for Professional Development. I work here in the Teaching Centre in Somerset West. And the title of my talk is 21st Century Tasks. The idea for it came from a research assignment that I was doing for my Masters, which I'm currently doing in teaching English as a foreign language. And a lot of it is based around this assignment that I did into task-based learning and how we can more effectively implement it in the classroom. So the session has 4 main objectives, and it's in kind of 3 main stages. First of all, we're going to look at what it the nature of authentic communication, what it means to communicate between 2 people, and we're going to ask to what extent we normally promote this situation in the classroom. We're going to look at 2 speaking elements of classes and 2 speaking elements that are involved in lesson cycles, and evaluate to what extent that speaking is representative of authentic communication. These 2 lesson cycles are based on 2 different approaches that are common within the kind of the communicative language teaching framework. However, they're both based on different theories of language learning, both of which have positives and negatives. So we're going to kind of take the positives from both theories of language learning and try and see how they can be combined to teach language more effectively. And I'll just comment on that. This isn't the aim of the session isn't to teach you how to teach skills. It's more to teach you how to teach your students to communicate and to try and have a good amount of grammar and vocabulary input in lessons. It's not to teach a reading or a listening skill, but I think that will become evident as we go through the session. Okay, so we've got a quick pair work speaking activity. If you could just speak to the person next to you and fill in the blanks of Jeremy Harmer's quote about what is communication. Okay, so here are the answers. Jeremy Harmer says, communication involves a communicator who wants to express something and an attentive recipient who wants to understand what is being expressed. I just like to think, how often do we teach classes where we involve students in a speaking part of the lesson, but that they don't really seem to be engaging with it, or they don't really seem to be listening to each other. Is this authentic communication or not? And this is what we're going to investigate by looking at 2 different lesson cycles. So we're going to watch 2 short videos, and in each video represents the speaking part of a lesson. I'll explain the context of the lesson before we watch it. But while you're watching the video, I want you to think about these questions. And I don't want you to think yes or no, I just want you to think to what extent is the video demonstrating these things. So first of all, is the activity that they're doing, is the speaking that they're doing engaging them on the level of interest? Are they interested in what each other is saying? Are they interested in the topic? To what extent are they using the language that they know, so the language that they can use automatically, to express the meanings that they want to express? To what extent is there an outcome? So in conversations, you often negotiate with another person to achieve something. Is the speaking that they're taking part in, is it working towards something? And finally, to what extent does the activity relate to real-world activities? Now, obviously, it's a classroom environment, so they're kind of pseudo-real world. But what I mean by real-world activities is it Is there a negotiation going on? Are they discussing the advantages and disadvantages of a situation by playing a game? It's the process of discussing advantages and disadvantages and evaluating them. That's the real world activity. The classroom game would be something that we'd use to promote that. So I want you to think about those questions as we're watching the videos. So the first lesson cycle is an activity taken from the English Files series. I don't know if any of you use or have used that in your classes. It's to teach intermediate learners past tense questions. So they're presented with a display text at the beginning of the lesson, which they then analyse, which they're then directed towards analysing the grammar for the past tense and past tense questions. They do a number of grammar activities at the back of the book, and then towards the end of the lesson they're asked to do this activity, which I'll let you read now in pairs. So basically A goes first, he or she asks the 6 questions, and then they swap roles. Let's watch the video bearing in mind these 4 things.
Where did you go the last holidays?
Last holidays I went to the Mediterranean. On cruise.
Oh, fantastic! And when you leave?
In July.
In July.
Yeah.
Who did you go with?
And I went with my boyfriend and his family.
Fantastic. And how did you get there?
How did you get there? Well, we were fine. I think it was an incredible place to visit.
Okay. Now, let's look at the second speaking from a lesson. This speaking activity forms the central part of the next lesson cycle. The lesson would start out by having the teacher write up the answer to 6 questions about his holiday, and then he would elicit from the students the questions for them. So I might write Greece, and then I'd ask the students.
Where did you go on holiday?
Exactly, thank you, Ali. So you'd have that would be kind of the engaging the first part of the lesson, so they're engaged about the topic of holidays. Then the students in pairs will be given these instructions. There are 3 minutes to find out as much information as possible about where your partner went on his or her last holiday. And they're told that after having done that, I'm going to give them a quiz, asking them about each other's holiday, and the person that knows the most information wins a prize. So again, remember, we're thinking about these things. Okay, do you understand what you have to do?
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, Ellie. How are you?
Hello, Christina. I'm fine. And you?
Very fine. How was your holidays?
Oh, my holidays was great. I went to Bulgaria with my family and spent there about 20 days. It's really good.
Oh,
And you?
really nice.
So, tell me.
I visited Rome, Naples, Florencia.
So you went to Italy?
Yes.
Oh, great.
We went on cruise and with my family.
When? In July and August? When?
In July.
In July.
20th of July.
Okay. How many days?
8 days. 8 days.
8 days. Oh, good.
Mhm.
Nice weather, or?
Oh no! It was raining. It was raining for 3 days.
Wow.
The weather is
Yeah.
rare. And where did you get to your travel to your trip?
I went to Bulgaria. Bulgaria is my country, so we went to my town, then to the beach. I went to my husband with my old daughter. I see a lot of old friends, part of my family, and good. I mean, good now. It's great.
Okay, thank you. Time's up. Okay, so just with the person sat next to you, which one? I hope it's fairly clear, but which one? Okay, thank you. I hope it's quite clear that the first video is stunted. They're not really engaging. They're engaging to an extent in the sense that they're there with each other, but they have no purpose. They've got no outcome to achieve, so that they're not really participating in any real kind of communication as defined by Harmer first. In the second video, the focus is very much on using the language that they know to communicate. Nothing's been stipulated. The 6 questions that were stipulated in the first language, the first speaking activity, weren't specified in the second, so they could use the language resource that they have available to them to achieve the task. And they were working towards a task. After the lesson, they were given a quiz, and they both had found out a lot of information about where the other had gone on holiday. At this point, the second video is more representative of what Willis calls a task in task-based learning. And Willis distinguishes between a task, which is engaging, on which the focus is on meaning, in which there's an outcome, and which mirrors real-world activities, and an activity. And I've tried to be careful about using the terms activity and task up until now, so I can now distinguish them. The first video, the students were participating in speaking activity. It's kind of general, not defined. They're not participating in authentic communication. And now I'm going to get you to do a psychological test now to illustrate a point that I want to make about why it's good to do tasks instead of language activities. Have a look at these. On your own, individually, I want you to say, what colour is this? Say it out loud now. Say it. What colour? It's difficult, isn't it? Your brain's trying to do 2 different things there. When you look at a word in a language that you know, you automatically read it. You can't do anything about it. You just read it. If you have to identify a colour, or you're identifying something in your perception, this is a controlled psychological process. So we're looking at the difference between a controlled process and an automatic process. When you learn your native language, you use automatically. You don't have to think about it. You've got kind of immediate access to all of the language that you know to express yourself. As you learn a second language, the difficult thing is beginning to automize it, and automize the grammatical structures, the vocabulary. So this is a fundamental concept in task-based learning, that students should be given tasks without much initial focus to identify what language they haven't got automized, what language they need to build on, what areas they need. Looking at the second video, for example, they were still tripping up on using the past tense correctly. So after having done the task, the teacher could then follow that up with post-task activities. Let's have a look at the theoretical framework on the two models of language teaching in which those speaking activity and the speaking task was situated. The first video was taken from English file and is based on a present, practice, produce model. This is a very common model and it has both advantages and disadvantages, which I'll go into in a minute. A general sequence of a lesson to present grammar or vocabulary would be to engage students with the topic, to have a presentation of the target structures or vocabulary, and through maybe a reading or a listening, then to analyse the target structures, to have the students do focused practice activities, and then to move into a freer practice of the language. This freer practice, as we can see, is often ill-defined, or is often just an activity where the students have to manipulate structures, speaking, that they don't have automised. So it's going against what authentic communication would be. If we think about this idea of authentic communication, tapping into the automised language that you have. As soon as you ask the students to think explicitly about what they're saying to each other, it's not automised. They're not really communicating as in the sense of authentic communication. A task-based cycle really has three stages. First of all, there's a pre-task, which is also called by Willis a facilitating task, which functions in a similar way to the engagement part of the present, practice, produce model. And as I explained to you, in the lesson where Christina and Ellie are talking about whether they have 3 minutes to find out as much information as possible about their partner's holiday, the pre-task in there, the facilitating task, was for the students to ask me about my holiday. So it was engaging them with the topic. Then the main task should, as far as possible, fulfill these four definitions, again as defined by Willis. Is there a focus on meaning in the task that they have to do? Is there an objective or an outcome? I think that should really say. Does the task mirror real-world activities that they would have to do? Obviously, again, in a classroom, pseudo-real-world activities. And is it engaging for them? Often the objective part of the model fits into the report. In the lesson cycle that we looked at, their objective was to find out as much information so that they'd be able to answer the questions in the quiz. So it kind of loops around. You might notice there's something missing from task-based learning. Task-based learning is great. It engages students in authentic communication. It's more interesting for them, but there's something missing. Can anyone? Exactly. There's no input. And this is something that Willis himself has acknowledged, that the kind of analytical aspect of the present, practice, produce model is missing from task-based learning. The students are going from one task to the next without really, what are they learning? Yes, they're participating in authentic communication, but what are they learning? Well, first, I'm going to tell you a story about one time when I was on holiday. I was on holiday in Sicily, and I remember having a 5-minute conversation with a waiter who didn't speak any more than 20 words of English, mostly adjectives and nouns. So, hello, weather, hot, good, yes. Like food? Yes, good. We communicated. He wanted to know about me. I was interested in listening to him. We communicated with words. The present, practice, produce model often expects students to, or makes students think that they have to know and perfect a grammatical structure before they can begin to talk. It's not true. In young children communicate initially lexically, using just words. Adults at elementary stages of language learning, like the waiter in Italy, speak in words, and they're perfectly able to communicate. What's important here in task-based learning is it shows the student that it can give them confidence using the language that they know to communicate, and therefore hopefully make them more willing to participate in communication in the foreign language. However, where it lacks in form, and now we're going to look at how we can consolidate the language that comes out of task-based learning by taking elements of the analytical from the present, practice, produce model. How can we work together? So the 21st century task. Here we've got the classic task cycle. Pre-task leading into a communicative task following the more principle and going into a report. These can be enhanced by adding a post-task stage in which there's an analysis of the language produced in the communicative task. And where can we get tasks from? There's very few, or I've never used a purely task-based course book. However, there are a lot of present, practice, produce course books with a lot of good material that, if you turn it on its head, or if you take the speaking activity and make it into a task, is a rich source of tasks for the task cycle. So, if we think about the second video with Ellie and Christina, they asked each other about their holidays. A lot of language came out of that. How can we analyse it? We can do simple error correction. So, I'm monitoring in the class. I write down some errors that students have made. I write them up on the board. I ask students to work in it with a partner. Can you correct the error? I spent about 20 days there. Whereas error correction often focuses on the negative, I think it's quite nice to include something positive as well. So you might want to think also about enhancing. Write the language as they said it on the board and ask them how they could say it in a more complex way. So instead of saying it was good, it was absolutely amazing. I had such a good time. And this is really focusing on the positive. Get them to personalize the language. This can often lead on from error correction and enhancing. So if they've all been making a similar mistake, you might say, right, let's enhance this language, then let's personalize it. Now, after we've done it, speak with your partner, tell them about an absolutely amazing holiday you had, tell them about a pretty good holiday, and tell them about an absolutely rotten holiday that you've had. So there's 3 things that you can do from the speaking that comes out of that. Focusing on the grammar that they need. You've identified a gap in their knowledge. Some of you might work in contexts where you have very big classes. How can you might be teaching 25, 30 students. And you might feel it's problematic to go and do error correction or enhancing with them. There's various ways of doing that I've used to approach teaching large number of students. You could identify groups of students and you could sit with one group on one day. Take notes, you take their notes for error correction and do them together. Doing it this way assumes that other people who are doing the same task have the same errors. And you could even ask them themselves to reflect on that afterwards. You could say, did you make any of these mistakes? Encouraging self-reflection on the students is another important part of task-based learning. You might want to have them writing down on a piece of paper while they're doing the task anything that they want to say but they don't know how. So they might just scribble it down in Spanish. And then in the reflection, in the post-task analysis stage, you can address it then. The thing about doing it afterwards is you're focusing more analytically on language and you're doing it in a more analytical way. So they can then take action points for the next time they do a task. Language learning, arguably, the present, practice, produce model sees language as something that can be taught sequentially over a course of lessons, and that students will learn what they learn in one lesson. That's not the case, I'm sure you all have experience of. You can teach students a structure, and then 5 minutes later they're getting it wrong again, or they're resorting back to the language that's automized. And doing error correction, enhancing, constantly reinforces the idea that eventually they'll get it right. Present, practice, produce is getting it right now. Task-based learning is, they'll get it right in the end. The more input they have, the more exposure they have, the better they'll get, and they'll eventually develop a level of fluency. Okay. How can we make the task more complicated? Tasks can often lack focus in terms of what you want to teach. You might say, I really want to teach them the past, I want to teach them the future, I want to teach them this vocabulary set. A well-chosen listening or a well-chosen reading text, again, from the published materials that you have, can be set up in a way that you do a communicative task before it and then lead into it. So we're going to look at an example of this, and then I'll explain the advantages of doing the communicative task before leading into a reading or a listening. So here's the basic task. In this case, it's a prediction task. There's a priming stage at the beginning, leading into a prediction task that they will need to do before a live listening. And then the report involves a comparing activity. After that, we'll look at what they can do post-task, which is actually listening. I shouldn't have written reading there. And then a grammar analysis, which focuses on meaning, form, and pronunciation. And then how we can recycle it, which is one of the most interesting parts of the post-task part. Because we want to look at that first. Okay, so this is a story about one of my best friends, Erica. Let me tell you a bit of information about Erica. She studied French at university, and when she graduated, she didn't feel that confident speaking French, so what do you think she did? Yeah, she did. She went to Paris. And when she got to Paris, what did she have to find? What are the two most important things? Accommodation, exactly, and a job. And initially she found a beautiful flat, and she found a job as a waitress in a bar. But there was a problem, and then I would elicit from the students like that, what was the problem? What do you think it was? Various options. She wasn't making enough money. So she had to find another job. And then in the course of a week, a very unfortunate incident happened involving a dog. Then I'd give the students 15 seconds to look at these pictures and memorize them. And I'll get you to do this activity now. Just look very carefully at the pictures. Now with your partner, are these true or false? Okay, so you can see how I do that to feed in some vocabulary. So all of these elements, the woman wasn't happy, she was shocked, really upset. Feed in bush, the type of dog, German Shepherd, dog walker, parrot, the monument, Paris, steps, which they often get confused with stairs, and suitcase, so that they can then make a story with them. So I think we've got time. What was the unfortunate thing that happened in Paris to Erica in the week after getting there? It involved all of these things. I'll give you really quickly, see if you can make a story with them. Okay. I'm not going to tell you the story yet. If we can see, we've gone through a priming phase, pre-task. I've told them the initial parts of the story, fed in vocabulary, but keeping it on the level of meaning. I haven't told anyone they have to use anything. And then we've gone into a prediction task. Use the pictures to make a story. The report stage would be to put students from pairs into groups of 4. They compare the stories that they've got, and they have to decide how similar their stories are. So they give a report back to the class afterwards. That's the end of the task cycle. But as you can probably imagine, there's a lot of language that's emerged from that. And, even more importantly, what do the students want now? They want to hear the story. Do you want to hear the story? Okay. So, in the week after, she was looking through the newspaper. She didn't have any money, so she was looking through the newspaper one morning in a bar on her break. And she saw a job for a dog walker. And she thought, I can do that. I had a dog when I was young. So she got a job as a dog walker. Everything was going well. And she was out one day, walking just in front of the Eiffel Tower, walking the dogs just through it, when all of a sudden the dog started to cough, and it just fell over and died, right next to a bush. So there's a big bush, so, oh no, what am I going to do? So she thought, well, if I hide the dog under the bush, I can leave it there, I'll go back to the lady's house, get a suitcase, come back, get it, and it'll be all right. So she dragged the dog under the bush, went back to Paris, went back to the lady's house, found the biggest suitcase she could find, because a dead Alsatian is very heavy, and took it back to the park, got the dog, dragged it through the streets of Paris, back to the lady's house, not knowing how she was going to explain what had happened. And she had lots of steps to get up to the house. Erica's not very strong, so she was struggling quite a bit with the weight. When a man, a very helpful man, came straight towards her and insisted that he help. Obviously she wanted him to move on as quickly as he could, but he insisted, and he started to get quite aggressive, and then all of a sudden he pushed her down and ran away with the suitcase. So the man stole a dead dog. So obviously that gives a termination to the listening. And in that story is really rich with past tense, past continuous, past simple, verb forms, vocabulary. It's really rich as a source of language that the students are really open to listening to, and that then in the post-task stage can be analysed in a number of ways, which we're going to look at now. So here's the first part of the transcript. You can see in red, past simple, red underlined, verb forms, past continuous. You also got discourse markers, referencing, explicative language. You can choose one and focus on it. And do a guided analysis, much as you would do in any of the course books. Which verbs, do the red or the blue verbs refer to a single finished action in the past? Etc. Then you might want to focus on form. And because the language is contextualized, students understand exactly what it's being used, the meanings that it's being used to express. After that, you have to focus on form, and hopefully they'll be engaged enough with the language to see the next few activities as a fun activity towards the end of the class. So, grammaring. After you've analysed the grammar point or the lexis that you want to, have on the back the verbs removed and make it a race. They have to put all the verbs back into the correct tenses as quickly as they can. Extending this, progressive deletion, you can do this on the board, or you can do it by photocopying the text and getting them to gradually delete it by writing over it with a marker. So say what the words are in the spaces. Do it again. Do it again. So they're really focusing on form and syntax, which is also very useful for them. Now, you might use text like this over the course of a term. You don't have to use a text once. Once you've contextualized the language through a text, you can come back to it again and again. You could use it first for the past, this text in particular, and then come back to it to look at discourse markers. You can recycle it by asking questions. You can use it as a warmer in a subsequent class. You could ask them to remember the Erica story, or you could ask them questions about it and give them a quiz. Once you've got 4 or 5 texts, you could give an end-of-term quiz about the content of the readings or the listenings that you've used over the term to teach them grammar. And within these questions, the grammar is going to be contained, so it's constantly recycling. Running dictation is another, it forms another source of running dictation materials. They're familiar with the text, they know what it's about. It's recycling the vocabulary, recycling the grammar. Again, and dictogloss, a dictogloss version, so you have a really reduced version of the text. Again, they can work in a team to rebuild the text. Any questions before I round up? Okay, we're going to round up now, and then I'm going to present you with a text and ask you to think of some of your own ideas about applying some of the things that I've been talking about today to that text. So we've looked at what authentic communication is, and how it's treated in 2 different language models: the present, practice, produce, and the task-based learning model. Present, practice, produce. The advantages of this model are it's very analytic. It does promote more complex language on behalf of the students. The task-based model promotes authentic communication, but lacks a focus on form. So we've looked at how we can get the best of both worlds by marrying the 2 theories. 2, with the overall aim of developing communicative competence, accuracy and confidence to communicate right from an elementary beginner level. Doing tasks based around text that you can find in books is a really great way of contextualizing language and then analyzing it afterwards towards the end of a cycle. And that's a good way and it's great to work with kind of memory games to constantly recycle the language afterwards rather than moving from one grammar point to the next. These are some different types of tasks. So we've seen a predicting task in the story. We've seen sharing personal experiences in the video at the beginning. The different colours are for different levels of cognitive challenge. So elementary learners might be engaging in tasks like this. Intermediate, going into advanced learners kind of projects, kind of gradually leads up. And for an advanced learner, a warming activity could be one of these. So here's a task I've taken again from Willis. Just read through it quickly, and with your partner just think about how you might implement a task-based cycle around that, what you could do with it. Okay, so just to put it into practice a little bit, a couple of minutes, what could you do with that text? Okay, so just to tie things up, again, a lot of the ideas for this session have come from the work of Willis and Willis on task-based teaching. So it's kind of an extension of task-based learning with the analysis stage put in after the task. If you want to see some more ideas, if you want to see, he presents a number of things, really interesting things that you can do with this text in that book. It's called task-based teaching. And if anyone has any questions, no? I'll finish there then. Thank you.